agree. They never tell me that they proud of me. Now they want to sit around with me. I'm still setting healthy boundaries. I don't even trust family. A lot of people look down on me. You ain't got a fake smile for me. I'm still setting healthy boundaries.
Good, family. Welcome back to Dr. James Spitting Game, the podcast where we have real conversations about parenting, education, juvenile justice, and youth development. Kids don't fail because they're bad. They fail because no one prepared the adults raising them. Today's episode is a powerful one because we're talking about what happens when systems collide. Schools, residential programs, child welfare, juvenile justice, and families, and how young people often get caught in the middle. My guest today is someone I've had the privilege of working alongside in real time, in real cases, with real consequences. Nicole Seese is a professional who has worked directly with youth and families across systems. We've shared responsibility for the same young person, me on the residential side, Nicole on the community-based side, which gives us a rare 360-degree view of what actually helps kids succeed and what quietly sets them up to fail. Nicole, welcome to the show.
Okay.
So, can you explain your role and the type of work you do with youth and families?
So my job is a myriad of different things. I work as a subcontracted therapist, and I also have my own business called Walk with Courage that kind of works hand in hand together, I guess. I work with all people in all systems. Um, I'm a person that wears hats of many uh colors, maybe, I guess. Um, that's the best way I can see it. But, I do advocacy, coaching, helping youth find their voice, helping parents. Um, it's my goal to help everyone know that they have a voice across those systems because every system is different, whether it's in school or mental health, child welfare, juvenile probation, or even in the community when I'm a youth group leader, camp counselor, um, you know. So I do a lot of work in a lot of different ways.
It's funny because I didn't realize until I got into juvenile justice that there were so many areas. In the school setting, you have the special ed students that have different um, service plans, but
Right.
then getting into juvenile justice, then it's like you say, you got children, youth, and family, you got juvenile probation, you have even just those two alone.
Mhm.
It's a very broad board of services that each of them might need. So,
Every family is different and they all have their own unique and complex needs, but one system might think that it's just a criminal mindset, but they don't look at the bigger picture. And then you have the other system that might just look at it as pure neglect on a parent's part, but they're not always looking at what's the driving force behind the behaviors or behind what's happening. And
mhm,
I like to try to figure that out.
right,
So,
right.
like to try to pinpoint what the actual problem is instead of just focusing on, oh, so and so has this charge or so and so did this wrong. You know, I like to try to get in there and figure out what's happening, all the moving pieces.
I think the sad part about that is sometimes it takes so long to figure out what that bottom line issue is. And by the time, in some cases, by the time you figure that out, how much time of the youth life has they lost?
Right. A lot of times it's a long time. I
Right.
mean, not speaking of specifics or, I think the most notable case I've worked with was when I was a juvenile probation officer, and this particular youth and I had a really good connection. However, he continued to, make poor choices and decisions that landed him ultimately charged as an adult and ended up in prison for a few years. And what I have found that, after he was there and he came home and he said he had time to think about what he did, he realized that, like, I was one of the only people that didn't judge him when he was doing those things. And I always supported him, even though he continued to make those decisions. And he said of all the people that worked with him, he felt like he wanted to do better so that he could say thank you to me in the end. But I told him, like, I'm really glad you're doing better, but you have to do better for you, not for me. Like, I'm glad that I was able to help him, but and I'm glad he was able to use me as his driving force, but to see him be a successful adult now is like the best thing that could have happened out of that. But everybody else wrote that kid off,
Right.
and they were all like, why are you so nice to him? And why, and sometimes it just takes that one person in this world that we work in to care just a tiny little bit,
Yeah. Yeah.
that can make that could make the biggest change in a kid's life.
So it's fine. I forgot that you did tell me that you were once juvenile probation. I forgot that.
I was for a few years. That was always my dream job. And then, life situations. I didn't do that at first, obviously. I worked in case management for a while. Um, and then I took some time to be mom, which is the most important job in my life, right? Is to be a good mom to my two. And then when my little girl went to kindergarten, I was like, okay, it's time to go back to a big girl job, and went to juvenile probation, and I worked there through, the pandemic and everything. And then again, life said, well, you need to be at home again with your kids because again, they needed mom. School was not consistent, and somebody had to be here with them. So I worked with homeless veterans for a few months, and I really found that that wasn't for me. Not that, I mean, I love helping people, but my heart is still working with youth.
Mhm.
And so I called the lady I subcontract for and was like, "Hey, I'm a free agent. Can I come work for you?"
That's right.
And here we are, 4 years later. So,
So what was eye opening about working the same case from just different systems?
so it's interesting. I have had one individual that I worked with when I was a probation officer, and then I have worked in this job in with the same individual in a different capacity. Obviously, two different systems. You know, um, what's eye-opening is that how the same child and family can be viewed depending on the system. Like I had said before, like one system we might see them as being non-compliant when they're juvenile, not following the court order, whatever is on those conditions, right? Like as simple as the curfew issue, but not doing their therapy, not participating when they're in placements, whatever. Um, but the other system might see things differently. Like, well, these behaviors are being driven by their trauma or by the neglect from, what how their parents raised them, or what they weren't given as children growing up, depending on the situation. Um, I think what happens is that we don't all often, and I'm guilty of it myself because you get caught up in it, is we don't look at the whole picture of the family. And a lot of times we don't have the time to be able to pinpoint every single thing that's going on and to look at that. You're given a window of time, maybe 3 months or 6 months to work with a kid, and you have to figure it out, or a family, and they might be on it for an hour, but then you don't see them again for another week, and a lot happens in that time
Right.
frame, right? So I think a lot of times it's not connecting everything and coordinating, and I think that's what's probably the most eye-opening. Um, it it just and the lack of like supports, I think we just expect families to know what to do. And honestly, there's so many things out there and they don't know how to connect all those dots. So it's really important if we're in a position to working with those families to be able to help them connect those dots in the community to be able to be successful if that's what if that's what they want.
Right. So,
So,
what would you consider meaningful family engagement? What does that look like?
well, first of all, if we're working with a family, is that what you're meaning? Like,
Right. So, you have
so
a
you have to respect the family's culture because, you know, obviously the way you and I live are completely different, right? Like, we obviously have similar beliefs and ideas because of the work that we do, right? Our passion lies in working with youth,
Mhm.
obviously, and helping them, right? But we have to look at, families are experts on their lives. We might have an opinion of this is how you should do things or this is how you should be, but we have to, like, as a professional and engaging with them, we can't assume things. We have to honor their culture. We have to be transparent when we're making decisions with them. Um, Involving the families early is super important, especially in working with a young person. I think, like, if we don't involve families from the beginning, then we've lost them through it. Um, because if we're doing one thing with their child and then they aren't knowing, that's not helpful. So I think it's really meaningful to have open and honest conversations with them, being flexible. A lot of times I say it, but we have to meet them where they are in order to propel them forward because if we go in there like, you know, just ready to change everything as soon as we meet them, we aren't going to build good relationships with them, and I think you have to, obviously, we all want compliance, but you're not going to get that if you don't take that step back and see and like respect their family system, I guess.
so it's interesting you mentioned the respect for the culture,
Right.
um, because oftentimes I see people struggle because they forget about that part.
Hmm.
And even for me, there's been times where I wouldn't say it was a cultural issue, but just not having the full buy-in by the parent. Um, how important would you say complete buy-in from the family, not just the parents, but whether it's a sibling,
Right.
older brother, older sister?
Mhm. I think it's important, especially if they're the support person. So, you know, I know sometimes when I was a probation officer, I was a lot younger, obviously. So one of the things that was hard was, whenever the parents were older than me and I was having to tell them what to do, or the caregiver was older than me and, well, this is what you should be doing, or this is, when they didn't buy into it, it wasn't as successful at all because that's, when they don't trust you, I guess, because that's how you get them to, to buy into things. If they feel in any way that you're judging them or, they aren't, and then the whole thing is gonna just go the wrong direction. You're not gonna get good results if you don't have buy-in from whoever is in that position as caregiver or support person. Some of our kids don't have parents, they have grandparents, so you have to get their buy-in,
Right,
win
right.
them over, I guess,
Hmm.
which sometimes isn't easy.
So what happens when systems are misaligned?
Well, that's when they fall through the cracks. And that's when, you know, you have trust issues with families, trust issues with the people you're working with. You know, sometimes a kid's going to get mixed messages, right? Like, my probation officer wants this done, but my CYS worker wants this done, and or my teacher wants me to do this way, but my therapist tells me to do something different, you there's a lot of so that makes a lot of confusion for a kid, and then that's when you see the kids not being engaged, the kids not wanting to do what you're asking them to do, being frustrated, anger. And with families, you know, if the two systems aren't working together, then you have complete chaos. And I'm sure you experienced that when
Yes. As I'm asking you these questions, I'm kind of having some flashbacks of what I dealt with sharing a child with you. You know, just so that was like my first time really seeing how no matter how well this child does, he's starting to realize it doesn't matter because he's still stuck in this situation because it's out of his control, right?
right,
And just going back to what we was talking about earlier is then it becomes how much of his life is he losing being in the system because of things that are out of his control.
right.
Um, so what actually works when supporting youth with complex needs?
I think collaboration, a lot of collaboration amongst all the players that are working with the kid. I'm really big, and I know you know that, but I'm really big on communication with who the kid's working with. Like, sometimes I think I get on people's nerves because I'm beating their ears, but you know, I one of the things that I do, Reggie, is I like look at behavior styles, and I'm an advocate. So that's my nature, right? To want to do what's best for that kid. So I'm a big um I'm really big into collaboration. Consistency, and compassion are some of those three big letter big words that, I think are really important. The other thing, I also am pretty strengths based, so I try to get the kids to see what their strengths are. You know, you'll hear me saying that a lot of times. Well, what are your strengths? Like, and since we work together, I've obviously been doing this more and I've studied more about, strengths based stuff. And I mean, I've always done strength, you know, we've always been doing strength based because even when I was a PO, we talked a lot about that with our kids, but um the more like leadership stuff that I do, the more I study that and see how important that is because I think that building off of their strengths helps them to be more successful. And if we aren't doing that, then we aren't letting that kid know that they're being seen, supported, you know, and I think that's super important. But
Okay.
collaborating is huge.
So, what advice do you have for professionals and families?
So for professionals, we need to sometimes just slow it down a little bit, and think about like, okay, think about the questions you want to ask those families, the kids that you're working with, you know, because you know that they're navigating more than just the children and youth system or just the juvenile justice system. I mean, or school, because a lot of the young people that I work with are in school, or even, if you're in a volunteer position where you're working with youth, like our youth kids and our camp kids, some of the best things that I hear and the best feedback that I hear from, our camp leaders are that, you sit and you listen to them, you let them talk, and so that's really important. With the families, support them, help them, connect them to services if you can't achieve what they need, you know, connect with them. Again, it goes back to respecting their culture. Learn about their culture and understand it if you don't understand it. I mean, with the kid that we worked with, you know, together, I had a lot of learning to do about
Mhm.
this culture where his parent came from, you know what I mean? And I probably could still learn a lot, like hindsight is 2020, right? Like
Right,
there's a
right.
lot of things that I didn't do right back then, but I'm sure there were things that I did right as well. But and for families, I think, I hear myself now telling my families a lot, your voice matters, your opinion matters. It might not be what everybody else wants to hear, but they need to be able to say what they think.
Mhm.
They need to trust their instinct. They should be, they shouldn't be afraid to advocate for their child. I mean, you I think a lot of times the misconception among the families that we work with is that when they ask for help, they look weak, but they don't see that the true strength that they have is in asking for that help.
Right, right.
And that to me speaks so much, speaks volumes whenever they say, "Hey, I really need help with this." Or can you tell me how to get the help that I need for this situation, you know? And I mean, that's huge when we're supporting families, is giving them that space.
So, I totally agree when you say we need to slow down.
Mhm.
And this is more for our viewers,
Mhm.
those that don't know that we're understaffed with these professionals. So
Absolutely.
oftentimes, a lot of times, we can't slow down, right?
Mm-mm,
Even when I think about the case me and you shared, there
mm-mm,
were people that were obviously behind in areas in that case,
mm-mm,
but come to find out, their caseloads was like ridiculous, like stuff I didn't even
mm-hmm.
never heard of. Like, I'm thinking like my caseload is super large. I'm like, whoa.
Right.
Um, but I definitely agree, though. Taking that extra time to ask some questions that probably don't have anything to do with the case, or sometimes questions that you get some answers that'll make you say, I wonder if that's why this is going on. Because I
Mhm.
found myself in that situation a few times. But
Oh, yeah, when you start to ask questions, you learn so much, but you also listen, you also can learn a lot. Sometimes it's just a good leading question, and then they just will start opening up.
mhm, yeah, yeah, I totally agree.
And I've been in social services for 23 years now. So I've worked with
Uh,
I've worked with folks from all walks of life, and I it's really just having a compassionate ear sometimes, sometimes is all it takes to help somebody.
I agree. Well, I don't want to take too much of your time, and I definitely appreciate you joining. I think the things that you shared are very important, not just for professionals, but I think for parents as well, um, because I think their voice really do matter, and without their voice, it's hard for us to understand their culture, their concerns, and even what's stopping them from buying in, right? But I definitely agree, and I hope the listeners and viewers take away that.
I hope so too. I mean, as a professional, just, really work on that non-judgmental approach to people, because if they feel if they feel any sort of judgment from you, then they're never going to buy in and want to work with you, you know. I sometimes don't even read a whole lot about the people I work with before I start working with them, because
Um,
a lot of that stuff, if you read, you're going to go in with an opinion already that might not be so great. And
I hear somebody saying that a lot. I hear a child say, "Didn't you know I did this?" And she's like, "I don't read about you guys. I learned from you guys by talking to you."
right, I mean, I've been doing that all along. Even when I would get new probation cases, I would wait till I met them. I would prepare the way I needed to for the
Right.
hearing, but I wouldn't dig, and because I just want to get to know the people first,
That's
and
right.
then I'll go back and, you know, be
Yeah,
surprised.
I think you got some good stuff for people to hear because that's all good stuff, right? I depend on I'm gonna say which department I'm working in. But
Yeah,
I often do the same thing though. It's like, no, nah, I'm not gonna read. But if I'm in this department, I'm like, I need to see what's
yeah,
going on.
yeah. I think it's situational, but for the most part,
Hmm.
I get the contract and I'm like, okay, and then I ask a lot more questions afterward.
Well, thank you so much, and I wish you the best with your new business that you got going.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm excited to get it rolling.
Right.
It's been a it's been a work in progress, and yeah, I think it's gonna be good. There's a lot that can be done with it, and um I'm excited to get going.
Right.
So maybe we'll reverse our roles someday here.
Maybe we'll see.
So, but thank you so much. I appreciate this opportunity, truly.
Thank you so much. Have
All
a good
right.
night.
You too. Bye-bye, Reggie.